ask you something important. Do you know exactly when you're supposed to declare minimum fuel? And more importantly, when it turns into a Mayday? How much is your contingency fuel? 5%? That's what you think? What about after the new EASA fuel schemes? Are you familiar with those? Well, in this video, I will try to clarify everything related to fuel management. Because, trust me, if you're sitting on the cockpit and you're unsure of that, you're setting yourself up for one of the most preventable emergencies in aviation. So let's dive into it. Fuel planning isn't just about plugging numbers into the operational flight plan. It's about understanding why those numbers are there and how to use them when things go wrong. Fuel, it's your margin, your safety buffer. It's what separates a smooth diversion from a terrifying emergency. Think about it like this. Fuel is weight, and that affects performance, climb rate, even range. Fuel is money. And airlines are always watching the budget. Fuel is time. The more you carry, the more options you keep open. And ultimately, fuel is your last line of defense when the unexpected hits. ATC reroutes, holding, runway closures, weather changes, or any other problem you may encounter. All right, now let's see. Our block fuel is made up of taxi fuel, trip fuel, contingency fuel, alternate fuel, final reserve, and any additional or extra fuel the commander deems necessary. Let's analyze one by one what each of these fuels really means. Taxi fuel is the fuel used prior to takeoff and must include pre-start APU consumption, engine start, and taxi fuel. It shall not be less than the amount expected to be used prior to takeoff. Taxi fuel is usually a fixed quantity for average taxi duration. Local operating conditions at the departure aerodrome shall be taken into consideration, and the taxi fuel adjusted accordingly. These conditions shall include at least average taxi time, any known ground delays, expected runway combinations, NOTAMs, meteorological conditions, air traffic services procedures, and any anticipated de-icing delays. The trip fuel is the required fuel quantity from brake release on takeoff at the departure aerodrome to the landing touchdown at the destination aerodrome. This quantity includes the fuel required for takeoff, climb to cruise level, flight in level cruise, including any planned step climb or step descent, the approach and landing at the destination. Trip fuel must be adjusted to account for any additional fuel that would be required for known ATS restrictions that would result in delayed climb to or early descent from planned cruising altitude. Contingency fuel is carried to account for additional en route fuel consumption caused by unforeseen factors such as wind, routing changes, or ATC restrictions. In general terms, the minimum contingency fuel is the greater of 5% of the trip fuel or 5 minutes holding consumption at 1,500 feet above destination airfield elevation computed based on calculated arrival weight. However, some regulators, with special approval, allow reduction to 3% of trip fuel. And here is where we find the main difference with the new European Aviation Safety Agency fuel policy. So in October 2022, they officially introduced a performance-based fuel policy. This approach is flexible, but data-driven. And under this new legislation, our operator may be authorized to reduce the contingency fuel to 3%, depending which fuel scheme is authorized to use. Basic scheme, basic with variations, or individual fuel scheme. It's very simple, and I will explain this new policy in a following video. Let's now talk about one of the hot topics of the fuel management: Alternate fuel is the amount of fuel required from the missed approach point at the destination aerodrome until landing at the alternate aerodrome. It takes into account the required fuel for missed approach at the destination airport, the longest route from the furthest missed approach point, the cruise and descent at alternate aerodrome according to an expected route, the approach at alternate, and the landing at the alternate aerodrome. When two alternates are required by the authority, alternate fuel must be sufficient to proceed to the alternate, which requires the greater amount of fuel. And when do we require two different destination alternates? Well, we do in these two cases. 1. When the weather report and forecast at our destination 1 hour before and after our estimate time off arrival is below minima. And 2. When no meteorological information is available at the destination airport. Now you know. But can we have an operational flight plan with no alternate airport at all? Well, yes, but only in special cases. The first one, and the easiest, is flying to an isolated airport. And, as you remember, if not, I do remind you, an aerodrome is considered isolated if the flying time to the nearest adequate destination, alternate aerodrome, is more than 60 minutes for aeroplanes with reciprocating engines, or 90 minutes for turbine-engined aeroplanes. You may also be allowed to fly with no alternate airport if the following two conditions are met. 1. The duration of the planned flight from takeoff to landing is less than 6 hours, or in the event of in-flight replanning is less than 4 hours to your destination. And second, 2 separate runways are usable at the destination aerodrome, and the appropriate weather reports for the destination aerodrome indicate that for the period from 1 hour before until 1 hour after the expected time of arrival at the destination aerodrome, the ceiling will be at least 2,000 feet, or the circling height, plus 500 feet. Whichever is greater, the ground visibility will be at least 5 kilometers, and no thunderstorms or shower activities are present or expected in the vicinity of the aerodrome. And this is all for alternate airports. Just remember, they must be adequate and suitable, which means they have the necessary RFF and ATC services and facilities available, meet aircraft performance requirements, and are operational at the expected time of use. Now, let's go to our final reserve fuel. Final reserve fuel is the minimum fuel required to ensure a safe landing when unforeseen circumstances may not allow the flight to be completed as originally planned. For turbine-engined aeroplanes, it must be sufficient to fly for 30 minutes at holding speed at 1,500 feet above the destination, or destination alternate aerodrome in standard conditions, calculated with the estimated mass on arrival. For aeroplanes with reciprocating engines, the final reserve fuel should be sufficient to fly for 45 minutes under the same conditions. This fuel is not to be used during normal operations and must be protected throughout the flight. Then we have extra fuel. This is the amount of fuel added to the flight plan to account for specific operational constraints or anticipated delays. This fuel is determined by the operations department and is separate from the discretionary fuel added at the pilot's discretion. Examples of situations warranting extra fuel include anticipated air traffic control, ATC delays at the destination or en route, known weather phenomena that may cause holding patterns or rerouting, airport-specific constraints, such as runway closures or maintenance activities. And finally, we have the discretionary fuel. Fuel at the sole discretion of the commander. The commander's discretion over the amount of fuel to be carried is independent and cannot be encouraged or discouraged. This means that the pilot in command has the authority to decide on carrying additional fuel beyond the planned requirements, based on their judgment and experience. This fuel is intended to provide an extra safety buffer for unforeseen circumstances that may arise during the flight. All right, let's jump into one of those sticky situations when the flight doesn't go as planned and fuel starts getting tight. Do you know the difference between minimum fuel and emergency fuel? And when we declare one or the other? Minimum fuel is a non-emergency advisory phrase. You use it when any further delay will result in landing with less than final reserve fuel. In other words, you're not in distress yet, but you're warning ATC that if delays continue, you won't be able to maintain reserves. Emergency fuel means you've reached or expect to reach the point where you will land below your final reserve fuel. That is an emergency. You must declare, Mayday, 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 fuel. ATC will give you immediate priority to land. Okay, I give you a practical example. You're flying into Amsterdam. You've been given holding due to weather. You've already burned through extra fuel and most of your contingency. Now, after 15 minutes of holding, you realize, if I get one more hold or reroute, I'll dip below final reserve. You still have time. You're not in distress. But you're close. You say, Amsterdam Control, Magic Airline 123, minimum fuel. ATC knows now, do not delay this aircraft any further. They won't give you priority, but they'll avoid worsening your situation. Let's say the situation above continues. You enter final approach, but now a go-around is issued because of a runway incursion. You calculate, by the time I land after this go-around, I'll be below final reserve. That's the trigger. You must now declare an emergency. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Magic Airline 123, fuel. From this point forward, you receive priority handling, and ATC clears other aircraft out of the way. You land as soon as possible. Remember that if you are in a holding at your destination airport, you still can use your alternate fuel to hold for longer at commander discretion. In that case, you have committed to land. Committed to land is a critical point in your fuel planning. It's the moment during a flight when you no longer have enough fuel to safely divert to your alternate aerodrome and still land with your final reserve fuel. At that point, you are locked in. So in practical terms, what does it mean? Let's put it simply. When you've burned through your trip, contingency, extra, and most of your alternate fuel, and the only way to land with final reserve is to continue to your planned destination without diverting. You are now committed to land at that destination. There's no more Plan B. Well, and this is all you need to know about fuel policies and planning. Just a couple of things to remember. The commander has the final authority on the required block fuel for the flight. The operator is responsible for providing an environment based on just culture principles where the commander's authority can be effectively exercised without undue pressure or economic performance targets. The operator shall ensure that fuel planning is based upon current aircraft specific data derived from a fuel consumption monitoring system or data provided by the aircraft manufacturer. The flight plan shall be based on a routing with the longest departure and arrival routes that could be expected. A fuel policy shall not only be based on an individual flight operating in predictable conditions, It must take into account, amongst others, congested airspace where multiple aircraft divert at the same time. For example, due to weather conditions or aerodrome closure. The ripple effect of multiple diversions at the same time shall be reflected in a fuel policy. Operators shall not compile nor publish rankings showing the individual pilots in terms of the amount of extra fuel carried. Any form of ranking and use made thereof must be de-identified in nature and governed by just culture principles. And that's all about fuel for now. If you learned something today, hit that like button, subscribe for more aviation deep dives, and let me know in the comments what topic you want next. I've got charts, stories, and checklists waiting for you. Safe landings!